Hello everyone, and hello again to the teachers from the UK. And apologies to the teachers from the UK because I'm have to run over a few things that we went through last week. Again, just to refresh your memories, my name's Tim Rudd and I'm responsible for the evaluation of this project. So whilst we spoke about you having your own action research projects, somebody's going to oversee the whole thing and see what's going on and try and make sense of all the different projects and approaches that are taking place. So we basically developed a broad methodology or set of methods to try and capture all that in a number of ways, and we need you to participate and help us. I'll be there if you have any problems, any questions, any issues that come along with the research side of things. So I'll put my email address up later, and you'll also be able to see me on the Unbox 21 community. As such, from my perspective, this is actually what we would call an intervention project, in that we've kind of come into you, we've got you involved and got you interested in using games in the classroom. But actually the project teams are influencing how you use these things. So we're not just kind of coming in as objective observers, if you see what I mean. We're not just coming in and saying, how did that go, and then writing up a report. We have to recognise our own involvement as a whole project team and the influences of things like today. So we'll be capturing all that. Because what we don't want to do, and what happens, I'm afraid, in a lot of the research literature, is people focus on the technology. It's children plus technology equals gains in learning. And a lot of it is quite mythological. It doesn't really exist like that. It is the interaction. It is the things that you do as practitioners. It is the things that you do in terms of looking at these games and thinking, how does that fit with my pedagogical style? How does it address an area of particular need? How does it develop pupil competencies and those sorts of things? So we have to be very aware of that. So we brought a number of different methods into the research methodology to try and actually make sure we capture all of this. So all of you are now actually logged on with the Unbox 21 site, yes?
Yeah, the teachers went through it yesterday, so
that's brilliant.
We might have one or two little issues to solve, but not much.
Okay, that's great. If you get to the page here, and you'll see the little icon down here, and excuse me because I'm not a Mac user, so I may press the wrong thing. But on this page you will see research here. Now here are basically most of the tools that you will need to actually complete the research side of things and help us to understand what's going on. The first document up there is actually what the requirements are. It kind of tells you very briefly what our approaches are, what sort of data we want to collect. So if at any point you're not clear, just refer back to that and it should give you the broad overview of what the teacher requirements are. The second document, he says, is an initial questionnaire. Now normally when people do evaluations, people will do sort of pre-test and post-test questionnaire to see how things have changed in the interim period. This is not necessarily hoping to do that, although we will at the end of the project do a smaller version of this questionnaire for you to complete. What this is trying to do is trying to understand your perceptions towards technology, your perceptions towards games, your prior experience, those sorts of things. So this is kind of broad first stab data collection for me, who has to look across 45 or however many different projects to see where people are starting from and begin to understand. And then when we use the other tools, start to develop a much richer sort of insight and picture of what is going on, what's going on in your brains, what things worked, what things didn't. But the questionnaire is quite a lengthy one, and what we'd like you to do, preferably sometime this week, if you could log on and fill in this questionnaire for a start. The next part, or the next document, is just a very relatively brief document on action research itself. It broadly tells you what it is, or at least one interpretation, because this is actually practitioner action research. Action research is very broad, very complex, understood in very many different ways. But what we're talking about with you guys is actually for you to develop your own practitioner action research, which has slightly different connotations. But the document there just outlines what action research is, what it's trying to do, and what your role in the process is. Further down, and I'll come back to action research in a little while, by the way, and we'll get you doing some initial thinking to try and help inform where you're going. Further down, you have an action research log. This is, again, for you guys, as you're going along, it's got the obvious sort of background information we need, so I can map it to your questionnaire and I can map it to the field work that we do later. But actually, this is a log for you guys to have a look at and start to fill in various different thoughts, ideas, things as they go along. What I've done for the time being is put these around kind of different processes of the action research cycle, if you wish. But it's okay, you don't have to kind of just specifically enter stuff under each heading that relates to that heading. Feel free to put other stuff in there, reflective elements, and so forth. So there's a load of prompt questions here. These you can ignore if you wish, but they're trying to get you to think in a different way, so that you don't just kind of think about how does a game work in my classroom, but you might be thinking about the broader skills, which challenge it addresses, and so on and so forth. So I put a load of prompt questions in there to try and get you thinking a little bit more. As I said before, ideally with the action research log, people would like you to fill it in at a certain point every week or every day or every so long. What we'd probably suggest here is it's probably only worth you doing it once you've done something significant. But try and do it straight away, because otherwise you'll start to lose things and you start to forget. I will see these. I will keep. I won't share them with other people. So if there are any kind of real issues you've got and you want to put it on there so that I know, then please do. But what I will do as well is offer you my email address, so you can contact me if you've got any problems with the action research side of it. We're not expecting it to be a dissertation or anything at the end. What we need here is an idea of how your thinking developed, what you actually did, the different steps, so we can not only kind of find out what has been going on, but also then reference it with the learning frameworks that you develop at the end as well, to make sure if there's any gaps, we'll probably have the data in the action research logs. The final document on there is the learning framework stroke lesson plan. And again, this is kind of part of the broader aims of the project. When we were thinking about beginning this project, we were thinking, well, there has to be some legacy. What you're doing is pretty cutting edge. Not that many teachers get that much time to kind of try commercial games in the classroom. The problem in a lot of the research literature is that people don't really tell you much in terms of practical detail about what you can do as a practitioner. How could you tell somebody else how they would use a game in the classroom? So these sort of learning frameworks, lesson plans, will be really, really important in terms of kind of developing the impact and the legacy of the Unbox 21 project. Now, before I move on, I just want to make sure, ask anybody if they've got any questions regarding the research side of things. That's a winner.
Excuse me? It's a question that I've got. I was planning on writing a paper of my own, possibly by the end of the project. So, would there be any intellectual capital situation?
We'll own it all.
Okay.
So what, you submitting, I mean, what are you talking about, the copyright of that IP on that work you produce?
Yeah.
I think.
I think. Sorry, Brian.
Well, I think we probably just have to acknowledge the Science Learning Centre, British Council, the partners in the project. That'll be fine. I mean, I've been on projects like working with the TDA where we've had that. As long as you acknowledge the project, that should be fine. we'd be very interested to obviously look at what you're doing.
We're just a thought right now. I'll find out by the time probably this workshop ends as to how feasible this would be.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any issue with copyright as long as it's, kind of treats everybody fairly. And the other thing is, if people are interested in kind of doing professional development stuff, we're all there to kind of support you as well. If you kind of want to write papers or if you want to go to conferences, then we can try and give you as much support around that as well, because it makes good sense for the project as a whole to kind of have more channels for dissemination. Okay.
Would this data then be available for such a writing? This data that's going on to the portal, would parts of this data be available?
Your own.
Or can like if I plan to do a paper, could I be able to upload a questionnaire and have people answer it? That sort of thing.
So
You personally wouldn't be able to have access to other people's data that's going on up here.
Yeah. But alternatively, if suppose I'm writing something and I like people responsive on a particular questionnaire, would I be able to submit it to you and for the questionnaire to go up?
I see what you mean. So if you want to carry out your own kind of, so I think we'll have to just be careful. But I think it's possible. We don't want to overburden what they're doing. But I think that's something we can. But I'm sure colleagues would be happy to help you out if it's a questionnaire. We're going to figure out how we manage that. But absolutely, you've got access to a really good group here, so we can manage that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with questionnaires is it's if you just want to do a questionnaire with people here, it's probably easier to do it through the portal. If it was a questionnaire you want to do with a wider group, it's probably easier to just set your own up or something like
Survey Monkey
or Zoomerang.
Survey Monkey.
Right. Just for practical information, if you want to jot my email down, if you can't see it, I'll give you a card later on as you come over. But I just thought before we started, I'd just give you a little bit of background of my history, really. Currently, I'm working at the University of Brighton on various projects, not all to do with technology, a lot of them to do with social democracy and equality, actually. Although I am involved with a couple of games projects, a couple of technology projects currently. Before that, I worked at a place that used to be just down the waterfront here called Future Lab, which was an organisation that was part funded by the government that looked at the way new technologies could be used to try and transform teaching and learning. And by that, we weren't necessarily talking about improved formal test scores, but we were looking at some of the 21st century skills that Baldef was talking about. We did a lot of prototype development, a lot of publication papers to try and get people to think differently. And in the 5-6 years I was there, we worked on a number of different sorts of games projects. And it's interesting because I was thinking about the conversations that were going on before lunch when people were talking about the kind of games that have been created, this sort of edutainment, or as other people have called them, chocolate broccoli. The things that kids pretty quickly want to bite into, realise this isn't the real deal, as opposed to the kind of commercial games and what the kind of benefits and the added extras that commercial games have. Now, are any of you familiar with James G's work? Check James G out. There's some points that you'll probably not agree with, but he has a very good analogy in terms of why commercial games are actually almost addictive to children. But he talks about it in a learning sense. And he says that we should try and, in a way, almost model what commercial games are doing in our learning offerings to young people. Because obviously these things have, hugely rich multimedia going on there, kind of huge production costs on a lot of them, and visual effects and so forth. But apart from that, it's actually, we had the conversation in the UK that kind of fell off the scale, but around personalisation. And the fact that if you play most platform games, for instance, you can go in at a number of levels of complexity, and there's a kind of ipsative assessment in that you're only comparing often until you start to play collaboratively. You're comparing your own performance, so you're trying to work out the narrative of the game. You're trying to work out what's going on, and you start to learn as you go through, rather than kind of something being fed to you, which many of the entertainment games do. But we put a few graphics on this particular thing to make it look like it's a game. But also in terms of the ability to be able to look at these games and deconstruct them as well. In terms of looking at the broad games have a narrative. There's a certain way you play them, and the more high spec games now have a number of ways you can interact and go off the main narrative. Now, if you think about taking that and putting it in the classroom, what you guys are probably going to do is even deconstruct that narrative. Because you're going to be trying it in different ways. You may play one aspect of the game, you may play one level of the game, you may get different learners to try different parts, or you may just get them to be critically reflective on what the game is doing and how it's been constructed, or maybe some of the things that are wrong with it. When we did the Teaching with Games project at Future Lab, one of the first lessons that the teacher did was to get the students to look at this particular game and deconstruct the very bad physics that was in it, because it was meant to be a good representation, but he took them through saying, hang on, would that really happen? And then we had another game that was called Mewtwo, which was a very different concept in terms of types of games, because it was basically a game on a mobile phone, what we call a micro game. Are people familiar with micro games? There's sort of 30 second games, and you play them very quickly, one off. Then you go on to the next one, the next one, the next one. There's a whole range of WarioWares. The Super Mario? There's a version of Wario's, which are, I think most of them are still free online. And you just play, they're very, very quick games. So what we did with a group called Soda Creative was to actually take that concept. How could we get kids actually making games, their own games? So we had these various different Newtonian principles that were programmed, and the kids could actually drag and drop and actually create their own little games, and they lasted for a few seconds. But actually, there was an element of the learning around physics, there was an element of the kind of functional aspect of manipulating the technology. But actually, in the field trials of that, the important thing was the changing relationship of the teachers and the pupils, because most of the teachers weren't more familiar than the students. So actually, it was a pedagogical change that occurred, because the teacher was suddenly having to ask students more questions about their knowledge than normally happens. It's normally the student that has to ask the teacher about, how can you help me, what do you know? So it's those sorts of things that we'll hope to get to the bottom of. Does it cause any sort of pedagogical changes going along? That was really just a diversion, really. What I wanted to do with you now is just to bring you back to this concept of action research. Can you put your hand up if you've done action research before, please? So not too many. So most people are diving in fresh from it. What I'll try to do, what I've tried to do in the document, and what I'll try to do here is not to overburden you with the whole arguments around action research, the methodology. We're just trying to start with something quite practical and keep on that level. The argument for action research is, as opposed to other pieces of research, is that sometimes an evaluator or a researcher will come in and kind of look at what somebody's doing and create a report, but actually often the practitioner, the teacher, doesn't gain anything from it themselves. They're just the guinea pig, if you want. Action research is actually trying to give you a framework so you can start to think more about your own practice and the changes that go on. It's meant to be kind of cyclical, so it goes on and on and on. And we hope that one of the outcomes of this project is that many of you will continue either with other projects around games or with other technologies where you start to think about how you might incorporate different elements in the classroom. Broadly, often, I think Brian, yours didn't, did it? But I think when you'll see these sorts of circles when you start to read around action research generally. you'll see this is a general sort of cycle. There might be slightly different language, but this is pretty much it. Often don't have this part, the using and disseminating results, but I think that's in sort of 10, 15 years of working in this field, working with teachers, that probably has as much impact on practitioners, not just other practitioners, but the action researchers themselves, because they find that, you know, as you know from your students, they're actually kind of rehearsing that story, getting the message across, actually causing you to be much more critical about the process. So what I'm going to do in a few moments, I'm going to get you to actually start to think as if you were about to do one action research project in your clusters now. Obviously it's a mock, so we're not expecting you to come up with anything, but it's to try and get you thinking about the process. And as I say, there's a document there that kind of explains it in a bit more detail. I'm on hand to help you should you need any advice and guidance. But generally these 5 stages, you start off with what is your challenge or your area? You know, what is the broad area? You know, many of you will have specific subject ones. You might have broad skills ones. It might be the 21st century skills areas that you want to explore. It might be a problem within your school or within your class about non-engagement or so forth. So you start off with that broad area. What is the thing that you want to improve in your practice? Or what are the outcomes that you want to develop in your school? So you start off with that very, very broad area. The thing to do then is go and don't waste a lot of time kind of reinventing the wheel. Go and actually do a bit of research, or better still, get your students to do it for you. Get your students to go and find out what's been done, because there's another element to actually research in classroom that doesn't get talked about too much. And it's actually that you, as an action researcher, are modelling something to your students all the time. If they see you actually engaged in research and trying to develop, you're conveying all sorts of things about what you want to do and what you think good learning is, and involving them in them learning conversations is absolutely crucial. So do engage your students with the actual research process if you can. So once you've kind of identified your question, you've done your search to see if anybody else has done similar things, or if there are any kind of burning questions that other people want addressing. Start to develop a specific, one-liner research question, an overarching one. What is the one key thing that you want to actually research? Behind that, you will have a number of sub-questions. For instance, if you wanted to look at, how do I teach, let's say, Newtonian principles or something like that through the use of computer games, you will have a number of sub-questions under that. Things like under what conditions, which games work best, blah, 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 blah. So you'd have a number of kind of other questions that would help you refine your thinking and would actually frame the way you actually start to collect data and what sort of data you want to collect. Once you've kind of defined your questions, it's the nitty-gritty then. Actually sit down and do the practicalities. Like, okay, how long is this going to take? How many lessons is it going to be? How many months is it going to span over? Who needs to be involved? What sort of support do we need from senior management, colleagues, technicians, so forth? How are the kids going to be involved? Are the parents going to be involved? All those sorts of things, with giving yourself, as you would on anything, give yourself various sort of deadlines, milestones, and so forth. And then the data collection and analysis. Data collection can take many forms, as you know. It could be through questionnaires, it could be observations, it could be interviews, it could be focus groups. It could be you want to get students thinking about reflecting on their own practice, so you open some sort of online log or forum or so forth, so that you can start to do that sort of discourse analysis of what's being said. It could be something that you do collaboratively with other teachers. It could be something you do on your own. It could be something you do with a very, in this case, a diverse geographical network. So there's lots of different ways you can take forward the action research. But the data collection and the tools you use will be influenced by the research questions. And there's got to be some, there's got to be some follow-through with those things. You've got to kind of make sure that you're using the right tools to collect the data to answer your question. And that takes some getting used to. And there are lots of very high-profile examples out there where people have used inappropriate methods of data collection to actually look at the question they were asking. There's some quite high-profile ones in the field of technology, to say the least. Then, of course, you have to decide how you're going to analyse that. What is the best way to look at that data? Sometimes it's absolutely fine to kind of see what emerges in terms of kind of looking at the concepts that kind of come out of their overall data. However, what we would suggest, and Baldev's going to do some more work on this tomorrow, is that you start to think about things that will inform your practice, your beliefs about learning, your beliefs about developing 21st century skills. And they could be a range of different sort of frameworks and metrics. It could be internal policies that you've got in terms of where you want to develop learning. It could be things like if people have seen the task wheels. It could be learning to learn skills. It could be the cooperative frameworks and those sorts of things. But if you have something, a framework that kind of sensitizes you to how you would look at the data that's produced, so that you start to understand and be able to speak in language when you start to write it up and so forth, that other educators will understand. There'll be a resonance there. Because that's been a real weakness in the research, is that often games are talked about as they engage the kids, they motivate them. Nobody tells you how long for, nobody tells you what happens when the next game is developed. Often, you know, we need to start, if we're looking at these resources as being viable, useful things in the classroom, you need to be talking to people who will understand your language. Why? Why should they use a game? What difference would it make? So what I'd like to do now, just very briefly, is I want to go through each of these 5 stages. And we'll probably spend not too long, because it's about trying to get you to think about the various stages and throw up different questions and issues you might have. But what I'd like you to do in your little cluster tables is to just identify maybe one challenge, one area, or one particular issue you want to address. A broad area, don't be too specific at this case. So if you just have a conversation and try and pick a particular area for now, that would be good. I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll get you thinking about the specific question. Now, for most of you, this is the first time you've even probably heard of action research, let alone had to start thinking about how you do it. But there again, that is the very reason we did this little exercise. It's because, you know, you need to sort of mess up. You need to kind of start thinking of problems. You need to start thinking about, actually, you know, I'm going to be using these games with 1 to 30 students, so actually that changes what my question is, an emphasis. Or you need to start thinking, we had some, can I just steal your thoughts for a moment? Okay. Would you like to explain, because I thought this was very interesting, because I was having various conversations all around. Starting to think about, well, you know, how do you kind of, if you start off with these games, you might get so far and kind of think, oh, this is wrong, you know. So we were saying, how would you actually get started? How would you start to begin to think about all the different elements that were being learned, rather than just focusing on the game and the actual practical aspects of delivering it? And there was some really interesting thoughts here. I thought about, you know, where you might start from an alternative.
Well, we just thought this idea of getting a whole series of cards together, just random cards, which gave the kids some kind of framework. So when they actually did the game, they were kind of thinking of these things as they were going along. So essentially, we just give them the game and say, here are some cards. What we want you to do is play the game, learn how to play the game, work together to kind of sort out a way through the game, and then once you've got the game sorted, use these cards to say about 5 or 6 different skill sets and just rank them in order. So what did this game actually help you to do? Did it help you to work as a group? Do you now understand?
An evaluator researcher, part of me wants to step back and go, it didn't work, or it did work. But actually the reality of this project is, it's about using these games to develop those 21st century skills. But also, the way to get children to understand those skills often is actually to give them the language of those skills. You know, kind of rather than it just dropping off the side. If they start to use certain concepts, certain words, and start to look for it in the learning, not just with games, but everything they do. You know, so they understand when they're developing those competencies.
I think I from a sort of, when you're describing that, that's kind of music to my ears in a way. And I hope if it, once you try it in anger and it works, for me, that is an approach like that is one which I certainly know scales up. If that you crack that and it kind of does what you're trying to do, I can quite easily see that. Teachers seeing that because it's making the cards, that's where the teacher has the input. I can see that is the sort of scaling up, sort of something which is simple, and a lot of the freedom is in the hands of the children.
Absolutely.
And you are just now really as a guide there.
Mm-hmm.
And which we talk about, but that pretty much exemplifies that to me in a very nice way, and it'd be interesting to see if that approach works in full anger.
It's really interesting because I've seen similar things happen before. I was saying earlier, in very different contexts. We did some work around learning spaces, designing before this current government cut all funding, when there was lots of kind of new school buildings going up, and we were invited to do work with different authorities, where actually you sat down with the children, and we started to have some sort of cards to show them different sorts of spaces, learning spaces, formal and informal, and of course they didn't have the language there to talk about them in any other way except for it looks nice, it's bright, those sorts of things, which actually for most people who went through BSF, that's what their consultation normally was. But actually what we did was to try and give them other language. So we were talking about collaboration spaces, we were talking about communication spaces, and we had a whole range of things around emotional feelings that you would have when you walk into a space. Is it kind of vibrant, is it dynamic, and those sorts of things. And then we showed the kids the same sort of cards, and suddenly they started to understand what the concepts were in terms of how the space was designed as well. So they had a much better language then to talk about the learning experience, and that's a similar sort of thing. But Balder, you're going to do something tomorrow on the LEAP framework. There are a lot of other frameworks out there that kind of, you could choose those concepts from. So that's the kind of next stage we'll go to. I don't think we're going to have time for everybody's feedback on these. So what I'll try and do is we'll try.
Should we get people to put them on the wall again?
Yeah.
Post over coffee. You can get them to put them up, and then
we'll photograph these anyway. So if you put them on the, or you can put them on the walls and we'll photograph them.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they went up on the wall today and we'll take snaps.
That'd be great.
Maybe we'll get a chance to have these conversations again. We tried to do something that people normally spend months and years to figure out in a quick session with people you've only just met. So don't feel disheartened that it's kind of what's going on. You've got a bit more time now to develop this. You kind of know a bit more about the things you need to be beginning to think about and plan. And I'm there on email to kind of try and help you if I can. So thank you ever so much for all your effort on that. Hope it's got the juices flowing a bit and helping you to think about how you might do it.
Can I just add one thing? And again, I think it was conversation we were having at the back there. So again, it's the actual research is only going to enrich your learning frameworks. So I can certainly see the learning framework is obviously all these tools, but you can see how this certainly strengthens how you plan that. So I think just trying to make the connection between the two there.
Okay, Brian, we got coffee?
Yeah, we've got coffee now, so perfect timing. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you very much.